a lot of the music that comes out of that whole idol pop machines, could sound sort of, in lack of a better word, like manufactured, right?
If you are looking for music that's creative and interesting and not necessarily trying to break records in terms of streams and KPIs, then you kind of need a different set of incentives.
Marketing is getting more expensive than ever, I think. I mean, before, you only had maybe 3 or 4 TV stations to promote on. Now you got to pay every influencer to play your music, right? So it's become sort of a wild, wild west.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Tomasz Koper, sitting in for Divya Gopalan. If you visited East or Southeast Asia in the 1990s or 2000s, you probably heard Taiwanese artists like Jae Chong, L.A. or Jolin Tsai coming from the radio in your taxi or playing at a random shop you visited. Or you saw one of the pioneering girl idol groups, SHE, tumbling out of a TV screen somewhere. Good times. But can you name one Taiwanese artist actively making music in 2024? Go on, I'll wait. Actually, I won't, but I bet that unless you're Taiwanese or have lived here a while, you're struggling. I'm pretty sure, though, that you can name at least one Korean music act. So what happened to the Taiwanese music industry in the last few decades? Is it long past its heyday or just overshadowed by flashy acts from Korea and Japan? Is that necessarily a bad thing? And is Taiwan succeeding in putting itself back on the music map of the region and the world? Well, to help us answer these questions, we welcome to the studio veteran music producer Jae Chong, coming to us from California. Jae, it's great to have you on the show. Let me start with a very basic question, kind of setting the groundwork here. How healthy do you think the Taiwanese music scene is right now?
Oh, wow. Great question. I think it's relative to the artists, but I mean, generally speaking, I think the whole industry took a big hit during the pandemic, and just the overall, I guess, the changes in the music industry in the last, I would say, 10, 15 years. So in many ways, record labels are downsizing their budgets. There's a lot of budget cuts going on and things like that. So there's been a lot of changes.
And well, you've worked with big artists across Asia, which includes Taiwan. What do you think, what in your mind sets Taiwan and the music scene here apart from others in the region, like big players like Korea and Japan?
Taiwan music had a really strong start in the 90s. If you remember in the early 90s, going far back as the L.A. Boyz, and Coco Lee and all these big artists that came out. A lot of the things that, or the main thing that contributed to that was the fact that a lot of these artists were bilingual, so they were able to be exported out to different regions of Asia, including Korea. So back in the day, a lot of the Taiwanese artists would do tours out in Korea, and do TV promotions, etc. That hasn't happened in a long time.
Well, before we move on, let's address the kokkiri in the room. That's Korean for elephant. Yes, Korea is probably the most internationally prominent music market in Asia right now, followed closely by Japan. And what they're globally most famous for are idol bands like BTS or AKB48. You might have heard that many acts like that are the result of an almost industrial, years-long process of selection and training. So, is Taiwan missing out by not having a similar system of mass fostering talent? For an answer, we spoke to music director, producer, and 3-time Golden Melody Award winner, Terence Hsieh.
But I guess it really depends on what you want. Like, if you are looking for music that's creative and interesting and not necessarily, trying to, break records in terms of streams and KPIs, then you kind of need a different set of incentives to make that kind of music. And so while the Korean system is very good for doing, in kind of this very industrialized pop thing, which they're very good at, if you want to create music that's, a little less, a little more off the beaten path, then you will need a different, way of doing that. And one of the ways that has we've been seeing a lot over the last couple of years is that the government, the Ministry of Culture has been providing these like 补助, these government grants for creating, to give local artists to create, basically. And so I think that having an independent and unique sound is probably makes more sense for up and coming Taiwanese artists at this point. When just in terms of a budget for making an album, in mainland China, it's probably going to be 3 or 4 or 5 times the size of what your budget is here, from a label. So, I think it's better that for here that an artist is really invested in what they're creating personally as well as artistically.
So Terrence there says that artists might be better off taking the more independent, less mainstream route, but that's not really where the money is it? Is there a middle ground, do you think?
I think definitely so. In Korea as well, the entire nation isn't just about idol acts. There's artists of all genres out in Korea. The only thing you see being exported actively are the idol acts. So, naturally, that's what most people see overseas. But I think, you can find a good balance of, kind of being creative and being, creating your own lane with the help of a major label. And I think that's what's going on a lot in Taiwan. The labels in Taiwan sort of assist the artist to kind of, express themselves through art. In Korea, it's the whole hierarchy of the business is very different. Korea is sort of like, centered around the company, and the artists are sort of signed under the company under a 360 deal, which is basically, they take care of everything. Whereas in Taiwan, a lot of the artists are sort of their own entities, and they hire, or the label essentially works for them in many ways. And a lot of the bigger artists today in the mandopop world, they hire their own staff. They hire their own lawyers, their managers, their own distribution company and all that. So there's a lot more creative freedom in that, actually. So you'll hear that in the music as well. Like Terrence said, a lot of the music that comes out of that whole idol pop machines, could sound sort of, in lack of a better word, like manufactured, right? Versus the Taiwanese market, where the music is maybe not as polished, but there's some sort of originality to everything. And I think in many ways, for me as a producer, I've worked in both markets, and one of the main things that drew me to the music scene in Taiwan was that the fact that the artist had a lot of creative control.
Terrence also mentioned government grants, government subsidies. Are these effective, not just here, but in general, in stimulating the scene and keeping the ecosystem alive?
It helps in ways where it helps like smaller artists. But for like idol acts, for example, I don't think the government could give them enough money to do that. Because these projects are quite expensive. Indie artists could put together an album with relatively small budgets, with all the home recordings and things like that. So government assist could actually help in those situations. But, when it comes to actual, like worldwide campaigns, it takes like another level of support.
Well, speaking of support, how did Korea become the music powerhouse in the region and globally that it is today?
Most people don't realize is that people have been working on this for close to 35 years, I think, in Korea. Ever since I was out there in the early 90s. And I think we all sort of had this sort of mindset of like, hey, the ultimate end goal is to go to the mecca of pop music, which is the US, right? So, and also the fact that Korea domestically, it's just the market's not big enough to support itself. So we had no choice but to export. So that's something that we had started actively doing in the, like, I would say mid 2000s. Like 2006, 2007, around there is when we started exporting. Like a decade later, like Taiwan was doing that in the early 90s, right? So Korea had a relatively late start in the export game, but they came. They doubled down on everything when things got hard. they never backed down, man. They just double, triple down, and then just kept going. And I think the resilience kind of paid off.
Well, you said that Taiwan had a strong start in the 90s and 2000s, but then seems to have faltered. Like, what happened there?
The industry itself, I mean, again, like I said, in Taiwan, it's more individual artist based. So, in the early 90s, there were a lot of what they call like ABC artists, right? English speaking bilingual artists like L.A. Boyz, Coco Lee, and, people who were like able to sing in different languages. So they were able to go to different places like the Philippines, Thailand, all of Southeast Asia, and as well as Korea even. Both of those artists showed up on TV, did national, like broadcasts out in Korea, etc. There hasn't been too many artists since, and the ones that became big later on, when the mainland market opened up, a lot of those artists started just basically exporting music over there instead. So that became the focal market.
One interesting observation that I had to crowdsource around the office, because I admit I'm not a huge pop music fan, is that there was a change in the music, the pop music coming from Taiwan between the 90s and 2000s and now. The lyrics seem to have been more edgy, a bit less soppy, whereas now it is all about soppy love ballads. Is it because of this transition to Chinese market, or is it because consumers or listeners, fans, they want that, or why was this change? Why did it happen?
I don't know. Maybe the world is just that much harder. But I would say, I mean, in the 90s and better part of 2000s, the music scene was sort of created by, I guess, like music producers, like myself, and maybe like a handful of guys were making a lot of the music during those times. Whereas now, a lot of the music being put out in Taiwan is sort of like self-produced, kind of a DIY kind of a situation. So a lot of the artists are dealing directly with fans. So, they don't go through the whole pipeline of A&Rs and all this stuff. So, in essence, they are expressing themselves. And I think they're fast realizing that, ballads always work because people always go to karaoke's, right? So I think that's sort of a thing that's always been the common denominator for the past 30, 40 plus years, is that, most of the songs were geared towards KTVs.
Right. Well, let's talk about recent events and the impact on music, because the recent COVID-19 pandemic had a tremendous impact on almost all aspects of our activity, and that includes music and the industry around it. Terence Shem, who we just heard from, used this time to produce an album that netted him 3 Golden Melody Awards in 2021. But what impact did lockdowns have on the music business around the region? Well, take a listen.
Over the last 3 years, because the borders in China were closed, it was very, those kind of high-selling stadium shows, an entire group of those, potential shows were cut out of any touring bands, lineup. So they were looking for different places to put on shows, start playing. This was Singapore over the last couple of years has become a really big hub for doing these kinds of large shows for international and Chinese acts. Taiwan, I think, is also more on the board now than it was because of that reason too. By the end of the year, I think this year, Taipei's Dajudan should be open. So I think that's like, how many, 40, 50,000 seat stadium. So I think now you can do 2 shows in Taiwan with a big enough capacity that you can really like make a show like Coldplay worthwhile. So maybe before it was only Kaohsiung, and now you have, by the end of the year, you'll have Dajudan open. So yeah, I think hopefully, I think it'll be great to see more large acts coming in, and my hope is that that would be the case.
So, do you agree that the pandemic has change the landscape of the music industry in the region, with Singapore becoming more prominent and maybe, as Terence suggests, Taiwan also kind of putting itself more on the map there a little bit because of COVID-19?
Oh, absolutely. I think, COVID definitely had a huge effect on all the industries. But during COVID, Taiwan stayed open, internally, right? Domestically was open the longest out of all the countries in the region. So a lot of artists, I think, like during the pandemic, Taiwan was the first to have like an EDM festival, and people, from Europe flew over there to perform and things like that. So they were the first to kind of bring back some of their live performances, the earliest, relative to like Korea, Japan, and China. So there was a lot of movement there. But at the same time, when everybody else started opening, that's when Taiwan sort of shut down. So it had a reverse effect. And I think like one of the things in Taiwan is that there's a lot of huge stadiums, like 50,000 capacity stadiums, but there's not too many small to mid-size. So a lot of the artists that are up and coming, maybe require maybe 1,000 to 2,000, or maybe even like a few hundred. There's not too many venues for that. So hasn't been too many outlets. So you're either performing at clubs or lounges in Taipei, or you're performing in a mega stadium, right? So there's not too much of a sweet spot anywhere else.
Well, we'll come back to mid and smaller venues, but let's stay with the big venues. One thing that Terence mentions is the Taipei Dome, Dajudan, which recently opened, and this adds to the pool of big venues, which actually is pretty limited in Taiwan. We have one in Kaohsiung, the National Stadium, and when we saw acts like Blackpink, Ed Sheeran, Coldplay play there, is this a question of build it and they will come, or is there more required to attract big acts than just having big venues?
I think it goes both ways, right? So I think having big venues invite big artists, like U.S. artists, European artists could come and perform, and I think there's always a demand for shows. Right now, currently, after the pandemic, there's been sort of a shortage of venues, so people are trying to book shows, like a year out, and they're all filling up. So there's a huge demand for more, if anything.
All right, well, let's go back to smaller venues. And speaking of them, they don't all come in 1XL size. A music ecosystem thrives on small venues that help beginner and indie musicians reach their audiences. Here's a Taipei-based drummer and songwriter Zoe Ye talking about the recent closure of the iconic Taipei live music bar Bobonde. This clip was filmed on location a few days before the bar saw its last gig.
1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, hey.
Yeah, I think for venue especially for like bands who just started, it's kind of limited in Taipei. Here it offers like every Wednesday night offers like open jam night. Even though you're like beginners, you can just sign up to play, and that's a very it's probably the only place in Taipei I would say like that offer the people who love music this such a freedom, and then you can play any kind of genre. That's like that's gonna be like a big loss like for Taipei musicians. Yeah.
Okay, so now let's put the big venues aside. Let's talk about the small venues. Bobonde being one example, which is a great loss to Taipei musicians. I played there once or twice, but how important is it to have small venues like that to maintain a healthy ecosystem?
That's the starting ground for a lot of bands. Artists, don't get to perform in front of 20, 30,000 people right out of the gate, right? So a lot of people need these small venues, and they're sort of like the hub for a lot of these new artists. And to lose something like that is it's a huge hit.
Well, so sort of building on that, how important is it to have like a robust indie scene to having a more international facing, like bigger acts? Are they two separate things, or do they feed off each other? And how often do we see artists transition from the small indie circuit to big selling out 40,000 seat stadiums?
That's a pretty big I guess question, because it varies so much between artist and to artists. But I mean, I think record companies, major labels have to be very active in developing new artists. I mean, a lot of major labels are sort of like, working with already known household names, but like we have to sort of bring back the whole, I guess, artisan repertoire, where they're discovering new talent and developing something new. One thing about the mandopop world that's very unique is that the fact that the fans love the same artist for like 30 years straight, whereas Korea, it's changing like every few months, right? People are still loyal to the same artist after all these years, which is a great testament to the artist. But at the same time, it could be a hard industry to break into as a new one. So. The new artists require a lot of support from the labels, and when the industry is downsizing, that's quite difficult to do.
And how does that compare to the United States and what's happening there in terms of like this interaction between indie and mainstream, big acts?
Well, I mean, right now with social media, a lot of people are opting for the indie route in the U.S. Major labels, I mean, they don't like offer the same kind of service anymore. So in many ways, it's like a two separate lane in many ways, and even within the major labels, the labels only focus on maybe the top tier artists, and the remainders just pretty much suffer the same consequences as everybody else, right? So I think in many ways, technology brought musicians direct contact with their fans, but in many ways it's become harder to do because there's so much music coming out, and none of it, or it requires good curating, right? And I think a lot of people are still leaning towards labels for that, to sort of like set the ground for the new trends and things like that.
Do you think that streaming could be this, great equalizer that helps smaller names, smaller artists, get eyeballs on their stuff and maybe get attention from labels? Is that a viable way to kind of get into the system? Or is it a dead end, basically?
I mean, it's a double-edged sword in many ways. I know a lot of people, are like anti-labels, and they all want to do it online and DIY, like do it yourself kind of thing. Maybe because I'm old school. I still think labels have a lot to offer. Not only just making the music, but like radio promotions and all the marketing that goes behind the music. It's quite costly for an individual to do. So that's something that I think a lot of people kind of overlook, and again, it's a highly risky thing. Even to sign with a major label, you don't know if you're going to be shelved or you're going to be in the top tier of of having that machine behind you. You just never know until you actually do it, right? But I mean, as much as it's equalizing or leveling the playing field, it's creating so much of it that it's just pure supply and demand now. There's just too much music that's out there, so it needs to be curated.
Speaking of this, marketing label machine behind artists, what is happening with marketing budgets in the age of internet and social media? Are they becoming larger, or are they shrinking because marketing is getting cheaper?
Oh, actually, marketing is getting more expensive than ever, I think. I mean, before, you only had maybe 3 or 4 TV stations to promote on. now you got to pay every influencer to play your music, right? So it's become sort of a wild west, and there hasn't been really any sort of like structure to it yet. Seems like sort of everything's sort of in the open. But I mean, in many ways, things are better because obviously, if you're a nobody trying to get discovered, you can put music on Spotify and different platforms to get your music out there. But it still requires people to come to you somehow, and that's through marketing, right? And marketing is in the current times, it's not an easy task.
Well, speaking of current times and looking ahead to the future, how do you think the industry here in Asia, in Korea, Japan, Taiwan, will develop in the coming years?
Well, I mean, right now music has just become so international. I mean, if you're releasing music in Taiwan, immediately everybody around the world is getting it at the same time. So there's a lot of like good to that, and also there's a lot of pressure because you have to make music that's world class now. Like the eyes and ears are everywhere, and so everybody has to step up their game. And I think in many ways it's sort of kind of like drawing like the cream of the crop to the top. So you see the same people as well, as well as like mainstream media, as well as like social media, right? You see the same people that are big in either the markets, and it's just becoming harder and harder to penetrate.
Thank you so much for your insights. Music producer Jae Chong joining us from California. Thank you so much for being on the show. And to our audience at home, it's been great to have your company. If you'd like to add to this musical conversation, head over to our YouTube and Instagram and leave us a comment, or better yet, record us a song. Thank you for sticking around, and remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.